Have you ever felt completely alone, like the whole world had turned against you? This is exactly how 12-year-old Ethan Williams felt every single day as he walked through the hallways of Roosevelt Middle School in Portland, Oregon. His story, and that of his extraordinary rescue dog Max, would soon become one that touched hearts across the entire community. Ethan was a thin, quiet boy, with glasses that were too big for his face, and an impressive knowledge of science that made him stand out in all the wrong ways. He had transferred to Roosevelt just 3 months ago after his father, a military veteran, had finally found stable work following years of struggle. The family hoped for a fresh start, but instead, Ethan found himself the prime target of 3 8th graders who ruled the school hallways. The ringleader, Tyler Johnson, was the star of the school's basketball team, with piercing blue eyes that could turn cold as ice when he spotted Ethan. His followers, Derek and Casey, were always flanking him like loyal soldiers, ready to laugh at whatever cruel joke Tyler had prepared for the science nerd, as they called Ethan. Every day brought a new humiliation: backpacks emptied onto wet bathroom floors, lunch trays knocked from hands, or the dreaded walk home where they would follow him for blocks, taunting relentlessly. At home, Ethan found his only solace in Max, a 3-year-old German shepherd mixed with a scarred muzzle, and one ear that flopped while the other stood straight up. Max had been rescued from an abusive home by a local shelter, and when the Williams family visited looking for a companion, something magical happened. The traumatized dog, who had cowered from everyone else, walked straight to Ethan and rested his head on the boy's knee. It was as if 2 wounded souls recognized each other instantly. Mrs. Williams, a nurse who worked night shifts at Portland General Hospital, noticed the changes in her son, his appetite diminishing, his once enthusiastic stories about science fading into mumbled responses when asked about school. She would sit on Ethan's bed, stroking his hair, asking what was wrong. But Ethan would just turn away, embarrassed that he couldn't handle his own problems, ashamed that the fresh start they'd all hoped for was crumbling because of his weakness. Mr. Williams, still battling his own demons from his time in Afghanistan, tried his best to connect with his son, suggesting they go fishing or camping like they used to, but Ethan would just shrug and retreat to his room, where Max would curl protectively around him. The loyal dog seemed to be the only one who truly understood the depth of Ethan's pain, licking away tears that Ethan was too proud to let his parents see, keeping silent watch during sleepless nights. The situation reached a breaking point one rainy Tuesday in November, when Tyler and his friends cornered Ethan behind the gym after school. "Where's your homework, science boy?" Tyler demanded, knowing that Mrs. Patterson had assigned a difficult physics project that he hadn't even started. When Ethan refused to hand over his carefully crafted report, Tyler shoved him hard against the brick wall while Derek grabbed his backpack. That evening, Ethan came home with a torn jacket, muddied jeans, and the shattered remains of the model solar system he'd spent weeks building. His father's face darkened with anger, not at the bullies, but at what he perceived as Ethan's inability to stand up for himself. "You need to toughen up, son," he said, the words cutting deeper than any physical wound, unaware that his military approach was only adding to Ethan's sense of inadequacy. The next morning, Ethan pretended to be sick, begging to stay home as Max whined anxiously beside his bed, sensing something deeply wrong. Mrs. Williams, exhausted from her night shift, reluctantly agreed, but warned him this couldn't become a habit. As soon as she fell asleep, Ethan sat in the backyard with Max, his only friend in the world, and for the first time admitted aloud what was happening at school. Max listened with an intensity that seemed almost human, his amber eyes never leaving Ethan's face as the boy described the daily torments, the feeling of walking through school with a target on his back, and the crushing weight of trying to protect his already struggling parents from another problem. When Ethan finally broke down sobbing, Max pressed his warm body against him, a silent promise that somehow things would change. What Ethan didn't know was that Max had been trained as a service dog before being abused by his previous owner. His instincts to protect and comfort ran bone deep. As Ethan cried into Max's fur, the dog's ears perked up, as if an idea was forming in his canine mind. A plan that would forever change the dynamics at Roosevelt Middle School and heal not just Ethan, but an entire family fractured by trauma and transition. The following day, Ethan reluctantly returned to school, his stomach in knots as he approached the imposing brick building. The morning passed in a blur of anxiety. Each class a countdown to lunch period, the time when Tyler and his friends would be waiting in the cafeteria, ready with new humiliations. Ethan considered hiding in the library, but knew that would only postpone the inevitable, possibly making things worse when they finally caught up with him. As the lunch bell rang, Ethan walked slowly toward the cafeteria, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He didn't notice the commotion at the school's front entrance, didn't see the flash of fur and determined eyes that had somehow tracked his scent for over 2 miles from home. Ethan was focused only on surviving the next 30 minutes, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Ms. Rodriguez, the kind-hearted Spanish teacher who had noticed Ethan's increasing withdrawal, was watching him from across the hallway with concern. She had reported her suspicions of bullying to the principal, but without concrete evidence or Ethan's willingness to come forward, little could be done. Today she had decided to accidentally be near Ethan during lunch, hoping to prevent whatever was causing the bright young student to fade before her eyes. What happened next would be recounted by students and teachers for years to come. The day Max the German Shepherd broke Roosevelt Middle School's no pets policy in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Just as Ethan rounded the corner into the cafeteria, a commotion erupted at the main entrance, followed by surprised shouts and the unmistakable sound of paws skidding across polished linoleum floors. Max, having somehow escaped from the backyard and tracked Ethan's scent across 26 city blocks, burst through the school's double doors on a mission. Security guard Mr. Jenkins, a retired police officer who prided himself on maintaining order, tried to intercept the determined canine, only to find himself outmaneuvered by an animal with purpose. Max darted between startled students, his nose leading him unerringly toward the cafeteria, where Ethan was just setting down his lunch tray at an empty table in the far corner, shoulders hunched in anticipation of the daily torment about to begin. Tyler and his friends had already spotted their favorite target and were making their way across the room, smirking at the isolation that made Ethan such an easy mark. What they didn't expect was the blur of tan and black fur that suddenly placed itself between them and the smaller boy, hackles raised, amber eyes locked onto Tyler's face with an intensity that stopped the bully in his tracks. Max wasn't growling. He didn't need to. His protective stance and unwavering focus communicated everything necessary. The cafeteria fell silent as students realized what was happening. The daily drama they had all witnessed or ignored now interrupted by this unexpected guardian. Ethan, initially mortified by the spectacle, looked up to see Max standing before him like a sentinel, and in that moment, something shifted deep within him. A realization that he wasn't alone after all, that someone had quite literally crossed the city to stand by his side. "Is this your dog?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, having followed the commotion from the hallway, her expression a mixture of concern and something else, a glimmer of understanding as she observed Max's protective posture and the way Ethan's hand instinctively reached for the comfort of his furry defender. The simple question carried layers of meaning, opening the door for Ethan to finally acknowledge what had been happening all these weeks. Principal Donovan arrived moments later, his stern expression suggesting immediate consequences for this breach of school rules. But before he could speak, Max did something remarkable. Without any aggression, the dog turned from his protective stance and gently nuzzled Ethan's hand, then sat beside him with dignified calm as if to say, "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The contrast between Max's disciplined behavior and the chaos he had caused getting into the building was striking. This wasn't a random dog running wild, but a trained companion responding to a genuine need. Several teachers, including the observant Ms. Rodriguez, exchanged knowing glances as the pieces fell into place. Ethan's withdrawal, his declining grades, the mysterious bruises, and now this extraordinary display of canine loyalty. "That dog jumped our fence and ran through traffic to get here," Mr. Jenkins reported, still catching his breath from the pursuit. "I've worked with K9 units, and I've never seen that kind of determination except in the best-trained service animals." His professional assessment hung in the air, lending weight to what was becoming increasingly clear. Max's presence wasn't just a coincidence or a pet missing his owner. It was an intervention. Tyler, momentarily forgotten in the commotion, attempted to regain control of the situation with a sneer. "What kind of loser needs his dog to fight his battles?" he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence, as Max's ears swiveled toward the sound, the dog's calm demeanor shifting just enough to remind everyone of the protective instinct simmering beneath the surface. Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, would you and Max please come with me to the counselor's office?" she asked, creating a dignified exit from the cafeteria where dozens of curious eyes watched the unfolding drama. As they walked away, she added quietly, "I think it's time we talked about what's been happening, don't you?" For the first time in months, tears of relief rather than anguish welled in Ethan's eyes as he realized the burden of his secret was finally lifting. With Max pressed reassuringly against his leg, Ethan followed Ms. Rodriguez to Counselor Mrs. Wright's office, where the kind-faced woman offered him a tissue and a safe space to finally tell his story. A phone call to Ethan's parents revealed another layer of the family's struggle. Mrs. Williams broke down upon hearing what her son had been enduring, the weight of her night shifts and exhaustion having blinded her to the signs, while Mr. Williams fell into a guilty silence. His military approach to toughening up his son now revealed as painfully misguided. Both parents arrived at the school within the hour, their faces etched with concern and regret. What followed was a difficult but necessary family meeting in Principal Donovan's office, with Max allowed to stay due to his extraordinary behavior and the obvious comfort he provided Ethan. School policies on bullying were reviewed, consequences for Tyler and his friends were discussed. But most importantly, Ethan finally found his voice, describing months of torment while his parents listened in stunned silence. "I didn't want to be more trouble," Ethan explained, his thin shoulders shaking slightly as he recalled the daily humiliations, the destroyed science project, the stolen lunches, and the constant fear. "Dad was just getting better, and Mum was so tired all the time. I thought I could handle it myself." The simplicity of his explanation cut through the adult complexities in the room, revealing how children often shoulder burdens to protect the very parents who would move mountains to keep them safe. Mr. Williams, the battle-hardened veteran who had faced enemy fire without flinching, wept openly at his son's words, recognizing in that moment how his own trauma had created distance just when Ethan needed connection most. Reaching across the gap that had grown between them, he placed a hand on his son's arm. "Son, you are the bravest person I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and I've known some of the bravest men alive." What happened the following week transformed not just Ethan's school experience, but the entire culture at Roosevelt Middle School in ways no anti-bullying program had ever managed to achieve. After careful consideration, Principal Donovan made an unprecedented decision that would later be featured in local news and education journals across the country. Max would be allowed to attend school with Ethan under a special accommodation typically reserved for service animals, with the understanding that both boy and dog would participate in the school's newly established anti-bullying initiative. The decision wasn't reached easily. School board meetings, conversations with liability insurers, and consultations with animal behaviorists all factored into what ultimately became known as the Max Protocol. A retired K-9 officer evaluated Max's temperament and confirmed what Mr. Jenkins had suspected. The dog had received advanced training before being rescued, displaying the discipline and intelligence typically found in professional service animals. This discovery raised questions about Max's mysterious past that would later be answered in the most unexpected way. Ethan returned to school the following Monday, with Max walking calmly beside him, wearing a special vest that identified him as an emotional support animal, school approved. The whispers and stares that followed them through the hallways weren't unkind but curious. Many students approaching cautiously to ask if they could pet Max, creating natural opportunities for Ethan to emerge from his shell. Something miraculous was happening. The boy, once defined by his isolation, was becoming known for something special instead. Tyler and his friends had received in-school suspension and mandatory counseling sessions, but the real consequences came from the shift in social dynamics their actions had unveiled. Many students, emboldened by Ethan's story, began speaking up about other instances of bullying they had witnessed or experienced, creating a ripple effect of accountability that changed the power structure within Roosevelt's hallways. The code of silence that had protected bullies for generations was beginning to crumble under the watchful gaze of one very special dog. Ms. Rodriguez, who had first intervened on that fateful day, proposed using Max's story as the centerpiece for a school-wide project on empathy and courage. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help, or stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves, she told her classes, inviting students to share stories of times when they had been brave or wished they had been. The responses revealed that beneath the typical middle school posturing, many children carried their own invisible burdens. The most surprising transformation, however, wasn't happening at school but at home, where Max's presence was healing the fractures in the Williams family. Mr. Williams, inspired by his son's courage and his dog's loyalty, finally agreed to attend the veterans support group he had been avoiding, acknowledging that his PTSD required the same kind of brave confrontation Ethan had demonstrated. Mrs. Williams rearranged her nursing schedule to ensure more family dinners, creating space for conversations that had been buried beneath the stress of survival. On a crisp December morning, as Ethan and Max walked confidently through Roosevelt's front doors, something unexpected happened. Tyler approached them alone without his usual backup, his normally confident demeanor replaced by awkward hesitation. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his eyes darting nervously to Max, who remained perfectly composed at Ethan's side, neither threatening nor retreating, simply observing with those intelligent amber eyes. The conversation that followed beneath the bare branches of an oak tree in the school courtyard revealed layers of pain that Ethan had never imagined existed beneath Tyler's bravado. "My dad left last year," Tyler admitted, scuffing his expensive sneakers against the concrete. "And he never calls, never shows up for games. Nothing." The confession hung in the cold air between them, an unexpected bridge of understanding forming where only animosity had existed before. Ethan, who once would have retreated from any interaction with his tormentor, found himself sharing his own family's struggles. His father's PTSD, the financial hardships after military service, the constant relocations. As he spoke, Max settled between the two boys, his warm presence creating a neutral space where former enemies could see each other not as target and tormentor, but as kids carrying adult-sized burdens. When Tyler hesitantly reached to pet Max, the dog allowed it, seemingly understanding that healing sometimes requires bridging impossible divides. This unlikely conversation became the catalyst for Roosevelt's peer mediation program, where students trained as conflict resolvers helped address issues before they escalated to bullying. Ethan, who had once been invisible except as a target, was asked to help develop the program, his first-hand experience providing insights that adults had missed. With Max beside him during these meetings, Ethan found confidence in his voice, his scientific mind approaching conflict resolution with the same analytical clarity he brought to his beloved experiments. The local newspaper ran a feature story titled "The Dog Who Changed a School," complete with a photograph of Max sitting proudly beside Ethan during a school assembly on kindness. The article detailed how one extraordinary animal had not only protected a bullied child, but had become the catalyst for systemic change. What no one expected was that the story would reach someone from Max's mysterious past, a revelation that would soon add another chapter to this remarkable journey. Dr. Michaels, a veterinarian specializing in service animal training, recognized Max immediately from the newspaper photo, reaching out to the Williams family with information that filled in the missing pieces of their beloved pet's history. "Max was part of our program training service dogs for veterans with PTSD," she explained during a meeting at her facility. "He was one of our most promising trainees before he was stolen during a break-in at our kennel 2 years ago." The discovery that Max had been specifically trained to assist with PTSD symptoms before his abduction and subsequent rescue explained his immediate connection with both Ethan and Mr. Williams, his innate understanding of emotional distress, and his extraordinary tracking abilities. It wasn't just loyalty that had driven Max to find Ethan at school that day. It was years of specialized training combined with a bond that transcended ordinary pet-owner relationships. Mr. Williams, who had been making progress in his support group, found himself oddly emotional at this revelation. "So, all this time I had the help I needed right under my roof," he said quietly, remembering how Max would position himself between Mr. Williams and the door during his anxiety attacks, how the dog would apply gentle pressure against his leg during moments of heightened stress, behaviors typical of PTSD service animals that the family had attributed to simple canine affection. The final piece of Max's story fell into place when Dr. Michaels offered the Williams family an opportunity that honored both Max's training and the remarkable bond he had formed with Ethan. "We'd like Max to become a certified therapy dog, working with both Ethan at school and with your family at home," she proposed, outlining a program that would make Max's school presence official while allowing him to fulfill his original purpose of supporting veterans like Mr. Williams. Spring arrived at Roosevelt Middle School, bringing with it a transformation as profound as the season itself. Ethan Williams, once the invisible target, had become a central figure in the school's revolutionary approach to bullying prevention. The Pause for Peace program, inspired by Max's intervention, had expanded beyond Roosevelt to 3 other Portland schools, with Ethan and Max making carefully scheduled visits to share their story and demonstrate how empathy could be taught through the human-animal bond. Max's official therapy dog certification had come through in February after intensive weekend training sessions that the entire Williams family participated in, strengthening not just Max's skills, but the connections between family members who had once been drifting apart. Mr. Williams, particularly, found healing in these sessions, the structured training exercises providing a constructive outlet for his military precision while teaching him gentler ways to channel his expectations. The most remarkable change, however, was in Ethan himself. The thin, frightened boy who had once avoided eye contact now stood confidently before assemblies of students, his voice clear as he shared his experiences. "Being bullied made me feel like I was nothing," he would explain, with Max sitting attentively beside him. "But Max showed me that I matter enough for someone to cross the whole city to protect me, and that changed everything." Principal Donovan, initially skeptical about allowing a dog on campus, became one of the program's strongest advocates after witnessing its effects on school culture. Disciplinary incidents had decreased by nearly 40%, attendance had improved, and perhaps most tellingly, students were self-reporting bullying before it escalated. "What Max and Ethan have taught us," he told the school board during their quarterly meeting, "is that courage is contagious, and sometimes it takes a different species to remind us of our humanity." The unlikely friendship that had formed between Ethan and Tyler continued to evolve, their shared experiences creating a bridge that neither boy could have imagined possible. Tyler, working through his own family trauma in counseling, had discovered a talent for art and created a comic book series featuring a superhero dog based on Max, sharing the proceeds with the animal shelter where Max had been rescued. These beautifully illustrated stories of Mighty Max became popular throughout the school, giving Tyler a positive identity beyond sports. Missy Rodriguez incorporated the Mighty Max comics into her Spanish classes, helping students translate the stories as a creative language exercise while reinforcing the messages of empathy and courage. "En español decimos valentía para courage," she would explain, writing the word on the board. Michaels, impressed by the program's success, invited Ethan and Max to participate in a research study examining the effectiveness of therapy animals in school settings. This opportunity connected Ethan with scientists and veterinary specialists who recognized and nurtured his scientific curiosity, introducing him to career possibilities that combined his love of animals with his passion for research and problem-solving. For a boy who had once been mocked for his intelligence, finding adults who valued his analytical mind was transformative. Perhaps the most profound healing, however, was happening within the Williams home, where Max's dual role as Ethan's emotional support animal and Mr. Williams' unofficial PTSD service dog had created a shared language of recovery. Father and son, once separated by a chasm of misunderstanding, found common ground in their work with Max, the training exercises providing structured time together without the pressure of direct conversation, allowing trust to rebuild gradually through shared purpose. Mrs. Williams watched this transformation with quiet joy, documenting the journey in a journal that would later become the foundation for a parent support group she established for families dealing with bullying. "The most important thing I've learned," she would share with these parents, "is that silence protects the wrong people." When Ethan finally spoke up, or rather, when Max spoke up for him, it broke a cycle that could have followed my son for life. The school year was drawing to a close when Ethan received an invitation that validated just how far he had come. The Portland School District asked him to speak at their annual conference on student well-being, sharing his experience as both a bullying survivor and a changemaker. The thought of addressing a room full of educators would have terrified the old Ethan, but with Max by his side and months of newfound confidence behind him, he accepted the challenge. On the morning of the conference, as Ethan prepared his note cards at the kitchen table, his father sat down beside him, looking more rested than he had in years. "I want you to know something, son," Mr. Williams said, his voice steady, in a way it hadn't been before his veterans group and family therapy. "When I was in Afghanistan, I had buddies who would have done for me what Max did for you, put themselves between me and danger without hesitation, and that's what real courage looks like." The conference room fell silent as Ethan concluded his presentation, Max sitting proudly beside him, the dog's scarred muzzle and mismatched ears telling their own story of resilience. "The bullies took advantage of my silence," Ethan said, his voice clear and strong. "But Max taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is make noise, bark when something isn't right, stand our ground when someone needs protection, and trust that we're not alone in our struggles." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Ethan's polished presentation or Max's perfect behavior, but for the journey they represented, from victim to advocate, from isolation to community. As educators lined up to ask questions and request visits to their own schools, Ethan caught his parents' eyes in the audience, noticing the pride on his father's face and the happy tears his mother was trying to discreetly wipe away. Tyler, who had asked to attend the conference in support of his former victim-turned-friend, approached Ethan afterward with the newest edition of his Mighty Max comic. "I drew something different this time," he explained, somewhat shyly handing over the colorful pages where, for the first time, Mighty Max wasn't working alone but had a human partner who looked remarkably like Ethan. "Heroes are better as a team," Tyler explained, the simple statement acknowledging how far both boys had come. That evening, as the Williams family celebrated with ice cream on their back porch, Max resting contentedly with his head on Ethan's knee, Mrs. Williams proposed an idea that would become the next chapter in their journey. "What if we trained as a therapy dog team? All of us," she suggested, looking from her husband to her son. "We could visit veterans' hospitals, schools, maybe even start a formal program for families recovering from trauma or bullying." The enthusiasm that greeted her suggestion confirmed what Max had known all along, that healing happens best within a pack. 2 years later, on a bright June afternoon, Ethan Williams stood on the stage at Roosevelt Middle School's graduation ceremony, with Max sitting attentively beside him, both wearing matching blue graduation caps that Ms. Rodriguez had specially made. As valedictorian, a position that once would have seemed impossible for the bullied transfer student, Ethan looked out at the faces of classmates who had transformed from strangers and tormentors into friends and allies over the course of their shared journey. "When I first came to Roosevelt," Ethan began, his voice steady and confident, "I was afraid to be seen, afraid to speak up, afraid to take up space in the world. It took a dog with a scarred face and a brave heart to show me that we all deserve to be protected, to be valued, and to be heard." The graduates and their families listened in respectful silence, many having witnessed firsthand the evolution of both boy and school over the past 2 remarkable years. Max, now a certified therapy dog and local celebrity, had inspired not just the anti-bullying program that had spread to 17 schools across Oregon, but a statewide initiative providing trained support animals to children recovering from trauma. The once abandoned shelter dog had found his purpose, and in doing so had helped countless children find their voices and their courage, creating a legacy that would continue long after Ethan moved on to high school. Mr. Williams, seated in the front row beside his wife, no longer resembled the tense, distant father he had once been. The veterans therapy program he now helped facilitate, often with Max as a support animal during difficult sessions, had become a model for similar programs nationwide. His military experience transformed from a source of isolation into a wellspring of empathy for others, still fighting internal battles after returning home. Mrs. Williams wiped away tears of pride as she watched her son speak, remembering the frightened boy who had once hidden his bruises and the family that had nearly fractured under the weight of unspoken pain. Her parent support network, Speak Up, had grown from a small gathering in their living room to an organization serving families throughout Portland, providing resources and community for parents navigating the complicated landscape of childhood bullying and trauma recovery. Max taught me something that no textbook could, Ethan continued, reaching down to gently touch the dog's ear, a gesture of connection that had become familiar to everyone at Roosevelt. He showed me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up for someone, cross 26 city blocks, break a few rules if necessary, and stand beside them when they feel most alone. Across the audience, hands reached for tissues as the simple truth of his words resonated. Tyler Johnson, who would be attending the same high school as Ethan in the fall, sat with his mother and younger brother, the Mighty Max comic series he had created now published as a graphic novel, with proceeds supporting both animal shelters and anti-bullying programs. The former bully had discovered that creation was more satisfying than destruction, his artistic talents channeled into stories that helped younger children understand empathy, courage, and redemption. Principal Donovan, who would be retiring at the end of the academic year, had made the Max Protocol his lasting legacy at Roosevelt, ensuring that the school's approach to emotional well-being and conflict resolution would continue long after his departure. "Sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from unexpected sources," he often remarked during teacher training sessions, and in our case, it came on 4 paws with unconditional love and extraordinary timing. As Ethan concluded his speech to thunderous applause, he and Max made their way back to their seats, passing Ms. Rodriguez, who had tears in her eyes, remembering the day she had witnessed a German shepherd burst through the school doors on a mission of protection and love. "You see," she whispered as they passed, "I always knew you both were exceptional." The simple validation from the teacher who had first recognized his pain meant everything to Ethan, a reminder of how a single person's attention can change a life. The graduation ceremony transitioned to the presentation of a special award created in Max's honor, the Max Award for Exceptional Courage, given annually to a student who demonstrated unusual bravery in standing up for others. This year's recipient was a quiet 7th grader named Sophia, who had created a lunch buddy system, ensuring no student ever ate alone, her own response to witnessing what isolation could do to a person's spirit and how simple inclusion could be the first step toward healing.